So we're obviously all working on follow-up stories of these remains that were found in Manitowoc County, and the sheriff's office said that it's going to be a lengthy process. What goes into helping to identify remains when they're found?
When they're found. So, like a lot of things in the world of crime scene investigation, it depends. The first thing is going to be, how long have the remains been there? At this point, we don't know. It's not been publicly made available. Is it recent remains, or could they have been there years, maybe decades? So, how much actual biological material is there versus, bone material? And that kind of separates how we go about not collecting the evidence, but when it goes to the lab, how the lab's going to actually process that evidence and how they're going to extract the DNA. And especially if we're looking at somebody who's in a state of decomposition, you got to find good tissue, not tissue that's being damaged or destroyed by bacteria, enzymes, animals, but you got to find a whole sample of that DNA. When it's bones, it's a lot harder. There is DNA in bones. Years ago, we used to say there wasn't. In more recent years, we found it. Wisconsin, don't quote me on this aspect of it, but Wisconsin, I believe we're still contracting with a lab in Texas to do bones because the equipment alone is outside the realm of justifying us buying that equipment to powderize the bones and then create a slurry and extract the DNA from that powder. Not something we do on a daily basis in Wisconsin.
I mean, they refer to these remains as skeletal remains.
Yep.
So what does that mean to you?
That means there's probably not much biological material there. It's mostly just the skeleton. There could be some flesh, maybe some organ material there, but imagine, scavengers, animals, bugs have probably done their duty on the body.
So much more difficult.
Much more difficult, yeah.
So when they say lengthy process, I mean, how long could something like this take?
It's going to depend. The whole process of extracting DNA from bone can be a couple-day process to begin with, and then running it through a database is going to be a few days also. Assuming our victim is in the database. If they're not, do we have a sample of the victim's DNA? Or if we don't have a sample of the victim's DNA, do we have an idea who the victim is so we can get family members and create a family profile and then compare it to that family profile? The other thing we have to remember is, unfortunately, it's not always first come, first serve at the crime lab. They do have a triage, much like going into the ER at the hospital. And so if we're contracting with an out-of-state lab, it's going to be, the fact that they have to do some of the cases in their own backyard first. And if they've got like a certain scene that is looking like they need to solve something sooner versus, again, we don't know, if these remains are more recent or more distant time. So, we may not be backburnered, but not at the front of the queue.
Is there a way to, I guess, to determine how old they are before you can determine the DNA?
The DNA? Yep. Usually, a forensic anthropologist can probably take a good look at them and see what the weathering and the aging on the bone has done. There comes a point where you can't say, oh, this is 10 years or 7 years, but you can say it's more than a year or something like that, where like this person's been out here for at least one full season of winter, summer, versus they've just been out here since the spring.
Is it, I guess, how long does decomposition take? I mean, if they say skeletal remains and, in your definition of it, there isn't a lot, I mean,
yep.
Is it possible, obviously there's a lot of speculation that these are the remains of 3-year-old Elijah Vue. I mean, how long would it take?
In the heat and humidity of our summer, we could see somebody go to skeleton in just a matter of a couple weeks. A lot of that's going to be dictated by scavenger activity, what animals are around and what bugs are able to infest the body. But in a cooler, climate, if the body were to have been placed in the fall and those animals start kind of going to ground, the bugs start being less active, and especially when we have the body freeze, you can have somebody go to more of a mummified condition than a skeleton condition, and then decomposition will take years because it's been slowed down so much.
Oh, so because at the beginning, I guess,
yep.
he would have been out there in February. In March, so.
It's possible that, you would have potentially frozen. Now, of course, now it starts to thaw, and again, scavenger activity, lots of variables here. And especially look at how our winter was versus previous winters. It was kind of mild, so how frozen? Was the body buried? Was there a depth? Was it below the frost line, above the frost line if it was partially buried? all those factors can play into how the decomposition goes.
And how much evidence would still be there at that point then
If they're
skeletal remains?
quite a bit, assuming we have the full skull and the jaw, that can sometimes speed it up is dental records. Otherwise, we would be able to see, injuries on the bones. Of course, too, again, scavenger activities, if there's been biting or anything like that, we would see marks on the bones. But if there had been a shooting, a stabbing, blunt force trauma, any of those kinds of things could potentially be visible on the bones and see injury patterns, just depending on the kinds of injuries that were sustained pre-mortem.
But obviously, there wouldn't be any DNA evidence of a suspect or anything at this point if there's very little other than skeletal.
It's not impossible, improbable, but anything is possible. If there was a piece of fabric, clothing, something left behind, possibly there could be some suspect DNA, yes.
I know, are we talking weeks, months to get an ID? And then they've said, be patient.
Be patient.
And how much of a backlog could there potentially be at the state crime lab or can you rush them, or is it like you're the 15th case in and you're still going to be the 15th?
Yeah, like I said, with the triage process, it's easy to say we're the 15th case in, but we could have something happen tomorrow. A national incident, not that the potential of this being Elijah would not be national, but you could have something that's a higher priority national incident, school shooting, something like that, which would suddenly come to the forefront and bump us where, now we're not 15 anymore, now we're back down to 16, 17, 18, whatever the case may be.
And then how crucial, I guess, is, the debate of like public interest versus evidence collections and I guess evidence protection maybe.
That's going to be pretty important, especially as it relates to thinking about if there's going to be trials in the future and what information is out there, stuff that is known to law enforcement versus becoming public record that somebody could say, well, yeah, I heard that on the news, or I saw that in a Facebook post, that some detail about an injury or something. But otherwise, too, I think a lot of it would come down to put yourselves in the shoes of the victims, of the living victims of the family, that while they're not knowing, you don't want to have that false hope of, oh, this couldn't be this person, or oh, this has to be this person, and then they're starting to feel one way or the other, and then 3 months from now, 4 months from now, when the actual results come back and it's something different, it's almost like the crime scene happening all over again. That they thought they had closure and now they don't.
We could be waiting 3 or 4 months.
We could be waiting 3 or 4 months, yeah, easily. I would hope not, but it's possible.
Sorry, I've been asking all the questions.
No worries at all. Sorry, I had to pop out. As I walk by, I'm going to swing this back over your shoulder real quick. Sorry about that. One quick question I had, and sorry if we do rehash anything at all, but with all of this process, and it is a lengthy process like you mentioned, we're transporting it, what is the importance, or how exactly is it transported with the evidence, with making sure that nothing changes in the transport itself?
Nothing changes in the transport. The basic way of doing it, and of course there are a couple different ways of doing it, but the basic way of doing it is as the body is being collected from the scene, I'm assuming it may have been buried or maybe a little bit of a surface scatter if we've got some scavenger activity. Working with like a forensic anthropologist, we've got a couple here in the valley between UW-Oshkosh and Lawrence University, where they would be able to assist law enforcement, our evidence collection folks, in saying, that is bone, that is, not bone, it's a stick, it's animal bone, deer bone versus human bone, making sure that we have the identified remains and all of that material goes into the body bag. A lot of times what we'll also do is we bring out sifters, so if the body is partially buried or buried, just like, in a sandbox sifting for rocks, we put all the dirt in and sift it and look for individual teeth, clothing fabrics, anything that would be trace evidence, like a bullet fragment, bullet casing, anything that we might find. And all that would either, if it's part of the body, go in the body bag. If it's not part of the body, it would go into an evidence bag. Typically, from the body standpoint, to make sure that you can't tape up a body bag per se, but we use what looks like a zip tie. Around here we call them red seals. And it's just a red zip tie with a serial number on it. And you zip it closed, zip the zipper of the body bag closed, and then that goes down to the medical examiner's office, or where they will take whatever they think is worthy of going for DNA testing, take that out, package it separately, and then the body can be left in storage so that when the remains are identified, it can be returned to the family as whole as possible.
Certainly, talked a little bit about the decomposition and how long it's been out there. How do you get DNA from the body if it's been in the ground?
If it's been in the ground. If there is some tissue, there still might be some connective tissue, some organ materials, anything that still has a fully intact section, even like some blood, we could get the DNA. Hopefully we would have, still some nucleuses, so we could get the nuclear DNA. If not, there might, mitochondrial DNA can be a little bit more hardy. That's only a match to your mother's side of the family, not your whole family. Hair usually sticks around post-mortem a little bit, so you might have hair where the body was at. Otherwise, there is DNA in bone. Years ago, we didn't think there was DNA in bone. We'd said there, couldn't be collected, but now we know that there's a process of grinding the bone up and creating a slurry out of it, and then being able to extract DNA from that. Very specialized process that we have to use out-of-state labs here in Wisconsin for.
And then I know we talked mostly about if, in the Elijah Vue case, if this was him. If there's not a comparable match, if say this is not Elijah Vue, how long can it take to get a match if you don't have something to compare it to?
If it's not him, and if we don't have any reliable missing persons or unaccounted for hunters from the last few years, it could never be identified. It could take anything from years to they'll just be a John Doe because we wouldn't have family to compare to or folks to know to compare to. But that's the importance of some of our missing and exploited children groups that we're able to get the families and know, okay, this male or female of approximate age based on bone growth development and whatnot, that we can match those up to missing persons reports and try and get those family comparisons.
Sure. And then on the other side of the spectrum, with getting something to compare it to, I mean, Elijah's been gone for quite a while. Yep. Can they pull it from, say, the blanket that they found quite a while ago, or something that they have from when he initially went missing? From when he was,
if we've got a good sample from when he initially went missing and we know it's his, the old cliche of like a toothbrush, a comb, his pillowcase would be good. Personally, I would like a second sample though. I'd like to get a sample from mom and dad or some biological close family relations and compare to that, simply because you think of something like a pillowcasing. Are we getting his DNA, or are we getting some other family member who may have, made the bed, sat in the bed with him, the dog, the cat, any of those kinds of things?
That's all I have.
Has CSI ruined it for us, that people expect it to happen?
I would say it ruins it for us, but yeah, we do talk about the CSI effect in class here regularly about the fact that folks expect that you can go to commercial break and come back and results should be there. And the fact that we are working, any particular agency is working dozens of cases, and the crime lab works with dozens of police departments, so it's exponential growth in the number of cases that they're working on. And again, that priority of if we have an active homicide and somebody's on the loose right now versus somebody in custody sitting without bail, it's a greater danger to have that unknown suspect on the street versus this suspect can sit in jail. And you hate to say it, it's not fair, but the triage system does make it so that it's more equitable, shall we say.
Once you do kind of have that profile though, and you put it into a system, it does it match quickly?
Quickly.
That was when.
I've seen matches come back in 15, 20 minutes if the person's in the database, or better yet, if we are looking at the fact that we are doing a one-to-one comparison. We have this sample. We have mom and dad's DNA. We have a couple of other probable DNAs of maybe some other missing persons or something, and we run it. And as long as the DNA extraction, all that stuff is done, you're looking at less than an hour that you would have a match to A or a match to B or a partial match.
And the extraction is the time
the extraction and the running of the code.